The widow arrived with 7 children. The rancher whispered, "I've been alone too long. Come home." The dust and the desperate hope. The dust plume rose like a defiant ghost behind the worn-out wagon, a testament to the long, unforgiving miles it had traversed. Inside, Eleanor Vance, a woman whose beauty had been etched deeper by hardship than by time, held her youngest, a silent, weary sentinel against the relentless sun. Around her, 6 other children, ranging from the gangly 13-year-old Thomas to the perpetually curious 5-year-old Lily, stirred restlessly, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the promised land. Their promised land for now was a ranch belonging to a man named Silas Blackwood, a name whispered to Eleanor by a sympathetic merchant in the last town, a man who allegedly needed help on his isolated spread. Hope was a flickering candle in Eleanor's heart, perpetually threatened by the winds of despair. Her husband, Arthur, a kind and sturdy man, had succumbed to a fever 3 months prior, leaving her with a mountain of debts and 7 mouths to feed. The small farm they'd owned had been seized, and with nothing but a few salvaged possessions and an old wagon, Eleanor had pointed her children west, chasing a rumor of opportunity. Finally, the silhouette of a sprawling, somewhat ramshackle ranch emerged from the shimmering heat haze. A large main house, several outbuildings, and corrals, all looking as if they had stood against the elements for decades, yet somehow clinging to life. This was Blackwood Ranch. Eleanor pulled the reins, the old mare whinnying softly in protest, grateful for the pause. "Are we there, Mama?" Young Peter, barely 7, asked, his voice raspy with anticipation. "Almost, darling," Eleanor replied, her voice raspy from disuse and anxiety. She smoothed the stray lock of hair from his brow, her gaze fixed on the ranch. It looked queer, too quiet for a place that supposedly needed a workforce. As they approached the main house, a figure emerged onto the porch. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a grizzled beard and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the world. He stood motionless, his posture suggesting a blend of surprise and an almost immediate defensiveness. This had to be Silas Blackwood. Eleanor swallowed, her throat dry. She dismounted stiffly, her muscles aching, and helped the youngest, Clara, down. Her children, a parade of wide-eyed curiosity and trepidation, followed suit, adding instinctively behind her. "Mr. Blackwood," Eleanor called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Silas Blackwood descended the porch steps, slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. His gaze swept over the wagon. Then the 7 children, lingering for a moment on Eleanor. His expression remained unreadable, a stone-faced mask. "I am," he rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly, like rocks shifting in a riverbed. "And who might you be, ma'am?" And this procession. Eleanor clasped her hands, a gesture of nervous energy she couldn't suppress. "My name is Eleanor Vance, sir. And these are my children, Thomas, Sarah, Jacob, Peter, Lily, twins Mary and Clara." She gestured to each child in turn, a silent plea for recognition in her eyes. "He was told, I heard you were looking for help on your ranch. My husband Arthur passed a few months ago, and we're in need of work. Any kind of work. We're strong, we're willing. I can cook, clean, mend. The older boys are good with horses, with hands-on work. Even the younger ones can contribute." Her voice, despite her best efforts, betrayed a tremor of desperation. Silas Blackwood's eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed. He took a step closer, his gaze unwavering. "He had lived alone on this ranch for 20 years, ever since his wife and son had been taken by the fever that periodically swept through the territories. His solitude was a chosen companion, a thick, protective shell around a heart scarred by loss. He had indeed put out word for a ranch hand, a lone man, capable and taciturn, who wouldn't disturb the carefully constructed silence of his life. not a woman and 7 children. The sheer audacity of it, the monumental disruption it promised, almost made him scoff. 7 children, he finally said, the words a low exhalation. Ma'am, I ask for a ranch hand. 1 man, not a small army. His tone was devoid of malice, but laced with an almost overwhelming weariness. Eleanor flinched, but she refused to let her gaze drop. Sir, we have nowhere else to go. We've come a long way. Please, just give us a chance. We will earn our keep. We won't be a burden. We're used to hard work. He studied her face, searching for a flicker of deceit or weakness, but found only resolve, tempered by exhaustion. He looked at the children, their faces smudged with dirt, their clothes patched but clean, their eyes wide with uncertainty. He saw Thomas the eldest squaring his thin shoulders, trying to look older than his years. He saw Lily clutching a worn rag doll, her thumb in her mouth. He saw the sheer vulnerability of them all, standing exposed in the unforgiving landscape. A memory, sharp and unbeaten, pierced through his self-imposed stoicism. The image of his own small son, his face flushed with fever, calling for his mother. The silence that followed their deaths had been a shrouded mourner ever since. He sighed, a deep, rattling sound that seemed to come from the very depths of his being. Come on, he said, turning abruptly. The sun's setting. You can't stay out here. He walked towards the bunkhouse, not looking back, assuming they would follow. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't an invitation, not exactly, but it wasn't a dismissal either. It was an opening, a narrow crack in the wall of his solitude. She urged their children forward, a silent play for their best behavior, as they trudged behind the imposing figure of Silas Blackwood, the dust of their past clinging to their heels, and the faint, fragile promise of a future flickering before them. They alternate empty spaces. The bunkhouse was Spartan but clean, smelling faintly of old wood and neglect. Silas pointed to a row of empty bunks. You can put your things here. There's a well out back for water. I'll bring you some food shortly. He left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. Eleanor set about making the bunkhouse habitable, instructing the older children to unpack what little they had, while she tended to the younger ones. Sarah, Atuadab, was a quiet, observant girl, already demonstrating a remarkable maturity. She helped Eleanor lay out their threadbare blankets, creating some semblance of order amidst the unfamiliar surroundings. When Silas returned, he carried a large pot of stew and a loaf of fresh bread, still warm. He placed it on a small rickety table, his movements stiff and deliberate. The children, their hunger palpable, watched him with wide, curious eyes. He seemed almost uncomfortable under their collective gaze. Eat, he grunted, and then turned to Eleanor. We'll talk about work in the morning, sharp at dawn. Eleanor nodded, grateful. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Truly. He gave it a slight, almost imperceptible nod in return, and then retreated, leaving them to their meal. As the children devoured the stew, their initial fear began to dissipate, replaced by the simple relief of warmth and sustenance. Eleanor watched them, a faint smile touching her lips. For the first time in months, they had a roof over their heads and full bellies. It wasn't home, but it was a start. The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments. Silas, true to his word, put them to work. Thomas and Jacob were tasked with mending fences, hauling water, and helping with the horses. Sarah assisted Eleanor with cooking, cleaning the main house, a place Silas rarely seemed to enter, and tending to a small neglected vegetable patch. Peter and Lily helped with lighter chores, collecting eggs and feeding chickens. Even the twins, Mary and Clara, too young for chores, filled the ranch with their giggles and babble, a sound that had been absent for far too long. Silas observed them, a silent sentinel. He saw Eleanor's quiet competence, her tireless energy, her unwavering dedication to her children. He saw Thomas's earnest efforts, Jacob's mischievous grin, even as he worked, Sarah's gentle nature with the younger ones. Ere the children's laughter, echoing across the yard, a sound that had been banished with the ghosts of his own past. His routine, once rigid and predictable, began to unravel, slowly, imperceptibly. He found himself pausing, listening to the unfamiliar sounds, the chatter and footsteps that now filled the empty spaces of Blackwood Ranch. He noticed Eleanor's quiet efficiency in the kitchen, the way she made a simple meal taste like a feast, the way she managed her boisterous brood with a gentle hand. One evening, he found Eleanor sitting on the porch of the main house, long after the children were asleep. She was mending a torn shirt, the moonlight illuminating her nimble fingers. "You should rest," he said, his voice softer than usual. Eleanor looked up, startled. "There's always something to do, Mr. Blackwood, and quiet time is rare." She offered a small, weary smile. He settled onto the top step, a respectable distance from her. "You've brought life back to this place," he admitted, the words surprising even himself. "It was too quiet before. Silence can be a heavy burden." Eleanor responded, her gaze drifting to the vast, star-studded sky, especially when it follows noise. He understood. He knew that heavy silence. He had lived in it for 2 decades. "My wife, Elara, and my son, young Caleb, they died of the fever 20 years ago." The words were out before he could stop them, a confession he had never voiced to another living soul. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes filled with understanding, not pity. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. Loss leaves a deep scar." "It does," he agreed, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I closed myself off, built walls, didn't want to feel that kind of pain again." "But walls," Eleanor said softly, "also keep out the light." Their conversation faded into the quiet hum of the night, but something had shifted between them. A tiny crack had appeared on Silas Blackwood's formidable defenses, not just letting in the light, but perhaps, just perhaps, allowing a faint echo of human connection to penetrate the profound emptiness he had lived with for so long. If you're enjoying this story, consider sharing it with others. Your support helps content creators like me continue to bring new stories to life. A simple share on social media or a quick recommendation to a friend can make a huge difference. Thank you for reading. Weaving a new tapestry. The days turned into weeks, then months, and the band's children, along with their resilient mother, slowly but surely wove themselves into the fabric of Blackwood Ranch. The ranch, once a monument to solitude, began to hum with activity and life. Thomas, under Silas Astern, but increasingly Jacinto Tilalles, learned to mend saddles and wrangle cattle with surprising skill. Jacob, with his boundless energy, discovered a knack for irrigation and tending to the growing fields. Sarah, meticulous and tamed, transformed the neglected kitchen into a warm, inviting heart of the home, her baked goods becoming a silent language of comfort. Eleanor, meanwhile, was a force of nature. She not only manages the household with effortless grace, but she also helps Silas with the ranch books, her sharp mind quickly grasping the intricacies of the business. She saw opportunities for growth, suggesting new crops, more efficient routes for market, and even bartering strategies that Silas, for all his ranching prowess, had never considered. Silas, to his own astonishment, found himself relying on her, not just for the practical aspects of managing the ranch, but for something deeper. Her calm presence, her quiet strength, and the easy laughter of her children chipped away at the layers of ice around his heart. He found himself looking forward to dinner, not just for the food, but for the lively chatter of the children and Eleanor's thoughtful conversation. He began telling them stories of the ranch, of the land, of the old days, his gruff voice softening with each passing tale. The children, initially wary of the imposing rancher, now sought him out. Lily would bring him wildflowers she'd picked Mary and Clara would cling to his legs, their tiny hands clutching his calloused fingers. Peter, the most curious, would follow him on his rounds, peppering him with questions about horses and cattle. Thomas and Jacob would listen intently to his advice, respecting his vast knowledge of the land. One crisp autumn afternoon, a sudden, fierce dust storm swept across the plains, threatening to decimate a newly planted field. Silas, caught off guard, was struggling to secure a fragile fence when Eleanor rushed out, not with panicked cries, but with a clear head and decisive action. She organized the older children, directing them to help secure tarpaulins and gather tools, her voice steady against the howling wind. Working side by side, their hands brushing as they strained against a stubborn post, they managed to save the field. Later, as the storm subsided and the last rays of sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Silas looked at Eleanor, her face smudged with dirt, her hair wild, yet her eyes sparkling with determination. "You're remarkable, Eleanor Vance," he said, the words a low murmur against the fading wind. Eleanor laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. "We're a team, Mr. Blackwood. Always have been." But the change was not without its challenges. Neighbors, few and far between, sometimes rode by, their curiosity thinly veiled. Whispers of that Blackwood, taking in a widow and her brood, occasionally reached their ears. Silas, for the first time in years, felt a surefire protectiveness, not just for his ranch, but for the family that now inhabited it. He met the stares with his usual steely gaze, daring anyone to question his decision. One evening, Silas found Eleanor alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at the setting sun. Her usual energy seemed dimmed. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice gentle. She sighed. "Just worries. The future. Always the future." "This is good, Silas. Better than anything I could have hoped for. But what happens if things change? If you decide this isn't what you want?" Her voice was laced with a vulnerability he hadn't heard before, a fear of displacement that spoke of past uncertainties. Silas walked to her, placing a large calloused hand on her shoulder. "Eleanor," he said, his voice firm, "this has changed things, yes, but it's not something I want to change back. This is right." He paused, searching for the right words, for a sentiment he hadn't articulated in decades. "My life was empty, Eleanor. Just work and ghosts. You brought laughter, life, purpose back to this ranch. You brought it back to me." Eleanor turned, her eyes searching his, seeing the raw honesty in their depths, the distance that had separated them for so long, the chasm of their individual griefs, seemed to shrink, replaced by an unspoken understanding. In that moment, a new tapestry began to weave itself, threads of shared purpose, mutual respect, and a nascent affection binding them together. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It was becoming a home, defined not by its walls, but by the lives within them. The whisper and the promise. Winter descended upon Blackwood Ranch with a vengeance, but this year it found a different kind of warmth within its walls. The children, bundled in homemade woolens, discovered the joys of sledding down snow-covered hills and building fantastical snowmen. The main house, once cold and silent, now crackled with the warmth of a roaring fire. The aroma of Eleanor's baking and the constant murmur of voices. Silas found himself spending less time in the solitude of his office and more time in the heart of the home, sharing stories, playing checkers with Thomas and Jacob, and patiently teaching Lee how to draw horses. His heart, once a frozen landscape, had thawed, beat by slow beat, until he barely recognized the man he had been a year ago. The ranch, once a solitary burden, felt like a vibrant, living entity, teeming with the energy of a growing family. The children were not a small army of disruption, but a lively symphony that had banished the oppressive silence. And Eleanor was the conductor, her presence a quiet strength, that held it all together. One particularly cold evening, as a blizzard raged outside, trapping them indoors, the family gathered around the fireplace. Eleanor was reading aloud from an old, worn book she'd found on a dusty shelf. The children were captivated, their eyes wide. Silas watched her, the flickering firelight dancing in her hair, highlighting the gentle curve of her cheek. He saw her devotion, her intelligence, her unwavering spirit. He saw the woman who had, without trying, healed parts of him he thought were irrevocably broken. When the children were finally tucked into their bunks in the bunkhouse, and the sounds of their breathing had settled into a quiet rhythm, Eleanor returned to the main house. She found Silas standing by the window, staring out into the swirling snow. "It's beautiful, in its own way," she murmured, joining him. He turned, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "Eleanor," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been alone for too long." He reached out, taking her hand, his calloused fingers warm around hers. He felt a tremor in the tremor in his own heart. "This ranch, it was a home before you came. A place where I lived but didn't truly exist." Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. She understood where this was going, but the suddenness of his earnestness stole her voice. He tightened his grip on her hand, his gaze unwavering. The storm outside seemed to underscore the profound quiet of the moment, the weight of the words he was about to speak. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, a vulnerable admission born of years of unspoken yearning. "Come home, Eleanor. Really home, to this house, to me." The words hung in the air, potent and raw. Come home, not just to the ranch, but to a life share, to a partnership, to a future where their two broken halves might become a complete whole. Eleanor felt a rush of emotion, relief, fear, joy, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. She had sought shelter, work, a place for her children to survive. She had found something infinitely more profound. She had found a connection, a quiet, steadfast love blossoming in the unlikely soil of shared hardship and unspoken understanding. Tears welled in her eyes, tears not of sadness, but of gratitude and a profound hope. She looked at Silas, at the man whose stern exterior had slowly peeled away to reveal a heart as vast and enduring as the land he worked. He was offering her not just a roof, but a foundation, not just a place, but a family. She didn't need to speak. Her answer was in the way she leaned into his touch, the way her hand tightened around his, the way her gaze, shimmering with unshed tears, held his with absolute certainty. "Yes, Silas," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind, but firm with conviction. "Yes." He sighed. The blizzard raged, but within the walls of Blackwood Ranch, a new chapter began, warmed by the promise of a home finally found, and a future forged by two lonely souls, now connected by 7 lively hearts.